Hello, this is Saved by Grace, Not Works. And today I'd like to talk about Jesus and the Sabbath. My title is Jesus Breaks the Sabbath Law of Moses, but he is innocent. What? How does that work? In the past, I thought that Jesus was intentionally breaking the Sabbath to teach and demonstrate that the law of Moses is no longer applicable. If Jesus says that his law given to Moses is no longer to be followed, then great. We stop following the law of Moses. But that is not what's going on here. As we've addressed in other videos, Jesus taught that the law of Moses is intact until heaven and earth pass away and until everything is accomplished from the prophets. He also said that anyone who teaches against the law is least in his kingdom. I'm going to point out a common thread in these Sabbath scriptures about Jesus. Each time there are two laws in conflict, the Sabbath law requiring a person to rest and another law that requires a person to act, Jesus teaches that there are weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. When faced with a conflict, Jesus teaches that we should choose the weightier matter. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 12, which reads, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath.' He answered, 'Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priest. Or haven't you read in the law that the priest on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. The Pharisees are declaring that the disciples are breaking the law of Moses by gathering food on the Sabbath. However, Jesus teaches that showing mercy to the hungry is more important than resting. Why? Because we should love our neighbors as ourselves. Jesus points out that the temple priests profane the Sabbath when they are working in the temple, but that making intercession is a matter of both mercy and faithfulness to their duties required by the law. Next, Jesus points out that we would show mercy to an animal on the Sabbath, and therefore it is right to show mercy to humans by healing them and loving them on the Sabbath. Preserving life and showing mercy to the hungry and those in need are weightier matters than resting on the Sabbath. They aren't self-centered pursuits. That is why Jesus declares these people innocent, because they have obeyed the weightier matter of the law. They have loved mercy and walked justly. So we need to judge these matters rightly. When asked what the greatest command was, Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second greatest is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus is teaching us the more important matter of the law of Moses. John 5 reads, "Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. In this case, at first, the religious leaders are less upset about the healing than about Jesus telling the man to carry his mat on the Sabbath. Jeremiah tells how God rebukes the people for carrying loads from their homes and through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath. The Pharisees interpret this to mean that a person cannot carry an item for any purpose. However, Nehemiah mentions the prohibition of carrying a load through the gates and relates it to the purpose of conducting business. And I'll put these scriptures from Nehemiah and Jeremiah in the video's description so you can read them yourself. The man Jesus healed is obviously not carrying his mat in order to conduct business. Later in John 5, this passage, the religious leaders begin to persecute Jesus for doing these things on the Sabbath, and he replies that his Father is always working, and so Jesus is busy doing his Father's work as well. However, just as the priests break the Sabbath while performing work given to them by God, Jesus is pursuing his Father's will. He is attending to the weightier matters. John 7 reads, Jesus says, "Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." Here, Jesus points out that it is acceptable to bring a person into covenant by circumcising them on the 8th day, even if it falls on a Sabbath. He is telling them to judge the weightier matters correctly and not on mere appearances. In Christianity, we justify throwing out parts or all of the law because we say we only have to love our neighbor. But we should not throw out the Sabbath or any of the law. That's not what Jesus is teaching here. We keep the Sabbath day holy until we're presented with an opportunity to obey a weightier matter. We're told the Sabbath is a blessing and to delight in it. But we shouldn't keep it at the expense of loving another person or showing mercy or doing the Father's works, which he has prepared for us to do. This is Saved by Grace, Not Works, and I'll see you next time.